Welcome everyone to this fourth in our four-part webinar series on Introduction to Prevention. We have had three great sessions up to now, and I'm sure today's will be equally exciting. We have with us from Moonshot, Sara Budge to talk about secondary prevention, and then our friends from the City of Toronto, Toronto Police, and United Way Toronto to talk about a very innovative secondary prevention program that they've been running for a number of years in Toronto, which is a new member city of the Strong Cities Network. And then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So without further ado, let me turn the floor over to Sara. And thanks so much again, Sara, for taking the time.
So happy to be here. Thank you all. I am afraid I would love for this to be as interactive as possible, but I also know we have a short amount of time. I also am aware that I am somebody who will start talking really fast when I get excited. So if you need me to slow down or repeat something, please just unmute yourself and just say, "Oh, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" I'm happy to, or to answer questions about this. But I really want to make this useful for you to be thinking about how secondary prevention could be implemented in your particular context, in your communities, using the resources that you already have available in your communities. And so I'm thrilled to be here with our colleagues from Toronto who can describe some of their programming as well. Let me introduce myself to begin with. My name is Sara Budge. I am a clinical psychologist in Portland, Oregon. I have experience working directly with individuals who are at risk for violence or targeted violence and are involved in violent extremism. I have been a part of the development of multiple different types of secondary prevention programs, and I currently work for Moonshot, which is an organization that intervenes in online harmful behavior. So working to identify those individuals that are engaging with content or communities associated with targeted violence, and who we may want to off-ramp and provide connection to resources or secondary prevention programs, such as you may be considering standing up in your own communities. So I'm really happy to be here with you all today. Give me a moment, I'm going to share my screen. Also want to say that my colleague Emma Cardelli was going to be presenting with me, also a clinical psychologist out of DC, and unfortunately she had a family emergency and couldn't make it. So I will be trying to cover her content as well as my own. So bear with me if I fumble through her content as well. All right. And I like to expand. I have two screens, so if you see me looking over, it's because I'm checking to make sure that the slides that I think you're looking at are actually the slides you're looking at.
We don't see the slides anymore.
You can't see the slides anymore?
I do not.
Oh, okay, hold on.
I see them.
I see them, Sara.
Oh, okay.
Well, Jordan, it's just you. You're the problem. Okay, we still see them.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Okay, Jordan, it's okay because you have a copy of them. You can look at them anytime. All right, so first of all, I think it's important to just situate what we're talking about in the context of all the different levels of prevention. And so in a public health model, obviously what we want are prevention strategies that address every stage of prevention. And I'm only going to be talking about a very narrow stage of this, but I just want to acknowledge there are all these other stages that ideally your communities and our societies will have appropriate prevention programs developed to address all these levels. First level, the bottom level is this primordial prevention. These are the social and environmental strategies that we use to try to prevent or reduce risk in some way. These are things that would apply to the entire population. They tend to be at the policy level and the systems level. I think some really great information that you can derive about primordial prevention for all kinds of forms of violence, including those that might be driven by violent extremism or terrorism, come from CDC's Connecting the Dots research. So if you've never looked into the Connecting the Dots research, it's got some really great stuff that helps us understand that a lot of the primordial prevention for preventing lots of different forms of violence includes things like addressing societal income inequality, strengthening health and educational or economic social policies and laws. So it's really these broad scope interventions that we do that we think or we know from research are the things that are underlying lots of forms of violence risk. In primary prevention, we are aiming our prevention or our strategies at people who might be at risk before risk develops. And again, a great thing to look at is the CDC's research from Connecting the Dots. Things like in primary prevention might be like interventions to improve impulsivity and behavior control. So these are interventions that we could deploy to large populations, large groups of people, but address individual level risk factors or prevent those risk factors from escalating before risk develops. It might also be emotion regulation programs. So lots of our schools have social emotional learning programs integrated into them. These are really important primary prevention programs for violence prevention. What we're going to be talking about today is secondary prevention. And secondary prevention are the measures that we put into place that are aimed at people in the early stages of risk. So we see that there is some level of risk for some adverse outcome. In this case, we're talking about violent behavior. And what we want is to identify those people who might be at risk in a non-punitive way and use measures to reduce that risk. Some of the secondary prevention programs out there that we're going to talk about today include identifying and intervening with people who might be expressing pervasive anger, who might be holding dehumanizing or violence justifying beliefs, or might be engaging in some preparatory behaviors as they might be planning to or considering committing an act of violence. We're not going to talk about tertiary prevention specifically today, but tertiary prevention is what we do when the problem has already occurred. What do we do when somebody is already engaging in violent behavior? What if they already have engaged in violent behavior? Some tertiary prevention things come in the recidivism reduction space. So after someone has already committed crimes, they maybe have already been adjudicated and incarcerated. How do we ensure when they are released from incarceration that we don't have issues with recidivism? However, I will say one of the challenges with secondary and tertiary prevention is sometimes we don't know where we are between those things because we don't always know if somebody's already engaging in violent behavior until we're already working with them. And so everything that we talk about for secondary prevention in a lot of ways is very relevant also for tertiary prevention. So everything we're going to talk about today would also be applicable for someone who's already engaging in violence. There might just be additional measures we might put into place to ensure that there is a lowered risk for your community or for that individual. So right now, again, just talking about secondary prevention, our goals are to address unmet needs, their risks, and the vulnerabilities of the at-risk individual, while we're simultaneously protecting the needs and the rights of our communities or the people that those individuals might be putting at risk. So we have kind of a dual focus. We need to be working on what's happening with this individual that's escalating their risk, and we need to be protecting our communities and others. And we do that by identifying people who are at risk, assessing whether there is an imminent threat, does there appear to be any behavior working toward or consideration of violence? Are they planning and preparing to commit violence? What are the risk factors that might be escalating, or the protective factors as well that might be mitigation against risk, and the kinds of places where we might do some intervention to either increase or to increase resilience and to decrease risk. We're also going to be looking at unmet needs and what are some of those vulnerabilities, again, that we want to address with intervention. And then we want to develop a management plan. So we're going to implement some kind of intervention. It could be supervision, it could be management, it could be treatment, something that we're going to do that's working to actively mitigate or reduce either risk or threat. And that we're going to talk about the differences between supervision and monitoring and management and intervention in a little bit. So roughly, these are our goals. We want to find the people who are at risk. We want to assess where they're at in that level of risk. and what they're doing and why they might be doing this. And they want to create a plan that tries to reduce that. And that ideally that plan is pretty comprehensive. So I want to start, this is our interactive part, by talking about a case. And so I want everybody who is listening, particularly my colleagues from Toronto, I'm going to invite you actually to share some of maybe your experiences with cases perhaps like this, or how you might manage a case like Michael. But I want everybody to listen to this case and to think about, what do we see as the problem here? What are we concerned about? What might we do about it? And who in your communities might you want to be involved in either assessing Michael's risk level, managing Michael's risk level, supervising him, providing some kind of services, providing some kind of connection, whatever that might be. And then what are we hoping to do with Michael? What do we want to do with Michael? So Michael is a 40-year-old divorced man who lives alone. He and his ex-wife share custody of their 2 children. They're ages 8 and 10. He lives near his parents, and he has a sister, and they share caretaking duties for his parents, who are older and they have some additional needs. So he is an important part of their support network as well. He's been employed by a local construction company for over 5 years, and he's known as a reliable and hardworking employee. He's really well liked by his coworkers, and they have a good social relationship, so much so that after work they frequently go to the local pub and have drinks after work and play darts together. Since his divorce, he seemed really angry, and he's been complaining about how he shouldn't have had to pay child support because he didn't want the divorce in the first place. Around the time that he divorced about a year ago, he started complaining to his coworkers about the way that men are unfairly discriminated against in the family courts, and how feminism is destroying society. More recently, he's been telling his coworkers that they need to, quote, take the red pill, unquote, and that, quote, his life is better since he took the black pill. Until now, his coworkers have really been letting him vent his frustrations with the divorce and his ex-wife, believing he just needed to let off steam. But recently, he started talking about punishing his ex-wife since he learned that she is dating someone new. And he's been ranting all day at work about her and about the new boyfriend. And 2 of his coworkers have approached their supervisor and said, yeah, we don't know what to do about Michael. He just seems really mad, and now he's talking about punishing his ex-wife. One night after work, when he and his colleagues are at the bar, the police are called to respond to a bar fight. Bar staff report to law enforcement that the 3 men that were a part of the bar fight were repeatedly shouting homophobic slurs at another patron while playing darts. Eventually, the man that they were shouting these homophobic slurs at punched one of them, and this set off a larger altercation among 2 groups of bar patrons. One of the individuals in the fight, Michael, quote, threatens to finish what he started if he ever sees them again. By the time the police had arrived at the bar, the fight had already naturally broken up, and most of the people involved in the fight were in the parking lot. So the local police interview the parties who remain, and they run the names of those individuals through their system. None of them have outstanding warrants, and so everyone is sent home. Meanwhile, Michael's ex-wife, Tamara, has been working to get full custody of the kids. Last time she went to pick up the kids from her ex-husband from Michael's home, he smelled like alcohol, he was slurring his words, and the kids tell her that they had watched TV all weekend and fed themselves cereal for every meal while, quote, daddy slept. Her ex-husband hasn't paid child support in nearly 6 months, and he calls her regularly at all hours demanding to talk to the children. The last time he called was 2 a.m. and he threatened to come to the house if she didn't wake up the kids so he could talk to them. Tamara says she was really relieved when the divorce was finalized because he no longer lived with her, which limited his harassment to phone and the brief meetings when they exchanged the kids. When they were married, he would scream at her for hours, and once he even broke down the bathroom door to get to her. She called the police and he was taken to jail. She filed for divorce and moved in with her parents, and now she's back in her own home, has custody of the kids, has a good job, and is starting to enjoy dating. She does worry that her ex-husband is drinking more and is asking for more information about her new boyfriend. She refuses to talk about her new relationship with him, but she does worry about what he will do. So I will pause and say, what about this case? And just feel free to unmute and say, what about this case concerns you?
The threatening behavior and language that Michael has expressed
Yeah, to anybody in particular?
to his, I mean, to the social circle, to the people at the bar, as well as indirectly to his ex-wife, I guess, when he found out about the boyfriend.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Christina, you're next.
With me, it's that too, and then the kids and the alcohol use and him not being attentive to the kids. So, they're saying they had to eat cereal all weekend just to see, the fact that the kids are seeing their dad like that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So we're concerned for the kids' safety. We're concerned that his functioning isn't good enough. He's not even caring for the kids when he has them. We're concerned that he's threatening people. He's at the bar threatening strangers. And he's kind of vaguely threatening his ex-wife, or kind of overtly punishing his ex-wife and maybe the boyfriend, her boyfriend. Anything else concerning about this?
This is Belisa Humes.
Hi, Lisa.
How are you? Hi, everyone.
Good.
What's concerning to me is the witnesses to the escalation, and being in spaces where there probably are resources for an intervention, and those who have that influence to make that happen, missing the opportunities. So at work with colleagues, they went through the empathetic portion, knowing that he's going through some difficult times. But once it started to escalate to threatening and saying that, he's going to get even, kind of letting them know I'm making a plan, they go to the supervisor. But I didn't hear anything about the supervisor making some time with Michael to help hear him and offer any resources that might be available for him, or helping him find those resources. I saw the same thing happened with his closer friends from work when they went to the bar. And then I'll come back to that. But the kids came home, talked to mom about the alcohol. But when he called and threatened to come over, knowing that she's been in volatile situations before, and now he's focusing that energy on someone he doesn't know that she may be dating. She didn't even contact Children Family Services. I mean, there are people in the system. He's paying child support, so he's in the system, which means there's resources there that she doesn't have to initiate. She could just file the report, the concern, and they have an obligation to follow up. And then the police missed an opportunity when they heard him. People heard him. They interviewed people. So I can't imagine that the people that they interviewed didn't tell them that, hey, he said he was going to finish the job. He was going to finish the job. Well, at that point, that was no longer, that had escalated from even what had taken place. And so because no one's reporting, the network isn't having an opportunity to connect that this is happening in every arena that he is finding himself socially in. So yeah, that was my observation.
Yes, absolutely. So you are all flagging concerning things. Everybody is noticing this. And Lisa, thank you, because what you're also noticing is there's an escalation, and you're noticing how many people are identifying concerning behavior, but in isolation. They have their piece of the puzzle. They don't have the full picture. So the supervisor, the coworkers and the supervisor see this little slice of how Michael's functioning. And the ex-wife has this slice of how Michael is functioning, and perhaps, and his children have this idea. And we can imagine that there might be other people around Michael who are like, gosh, this is concerning. There's something concerning here. Where do all of those people go to get services or support to Michael, to protect the community potentially from Michael, to protect his kids, possibly his ex-wife, but also to help Michael? Because he clearly is not doing well. He's not functioning well. And so one, where do all those people go? And how do we make sure that, like you noted, Lisa, that that we could contact children's services, we could be contacting the employer, could be maybe contacting the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, to get mental health services for him. Perhaps he needs alcohol and drug treatment. Who's putting the whole picture together to say, these things are not all isolation. They're not single issues in isolation. They need a bigger picture needs to be considered. And how do we make sure we're coordinating all of our resources? So I want to actually pause and see if not to put my colleagues from Canada on the spot, but any thoughts you have on this case? And does a case like this sound familiar? Does this kind of stuff come across your desk in your experience as well?
I wonder, Brian, is this something maybe you want to speak to?
Yes, yeah, this type of situation is common, and we've been working on a program here since 2014 to try to address with that. And I mean, we're going to talk about focus later, but we have 190 community agencies that were able to leverage their expertise, plus one of our agencies, Yorktown, and their ETA program is really able to deal with the extremism piece.
Right. And so for my Canadian colleagues, did you pick up on the little bit of extremism that was coming out in this case study?
Yes.
Yeah. So there were a couple keywords in there that and again, you don't have to know this to know there's a problem here, but the things like taking the red pill or taking the black pill comes from a violent misogynist movement, an incel misogynist movement, or the incel is a short for involuntary celibate. It is a violent misogynist movement that advocates violence against women in particular, but also men who are perceived to be successful in relationships and sexually active. It also is associated with a lot of significant mental health challenges for the individuals who are involved, for some individuals, and suicidal ideation in many cases. So we have a real mix of issues here. And as Brian's pointing out, in Toronto, that is an incredible number of community organizations that you would have at your disposal to help and support someone like Michael, like his family, like the people around him, like his coworkers as well. And so when we're thinking about your communities, you have these resources in your communities. A lot of what we're doing in secondary prevention is trying to figure out how do we get those resources to all talk to each other and to build a comprehensive management plan around Michael to make sure we're reducing his risk and potential threat to others. So, of course, when we're looking at this case and we're considering secondary prevention, we are looking at like, who's the client, whose needs need to be addressed, who do all of those bystanders, as we would call them, all those people around Michael who are like, something's wrong, we need to do something. Who do they call for support? What do they do? And what we want is to build a team, a multidisciplinary team of professionals in your communities who have the skills both to assess this risk level and create a good management plan around them. So considering what your core team looks like, who's on every case, And then sometimes you're going to need ad hoc members. Michael might in particular need drug and alcohol treatment. Do we have drug and alcohol treatment that we can bring to the table? Whereas you might have other individuals in your community who aren't going to need drug and alcohol treatment, but what they might need is some kind of occupational supports. They need some workforce training. So thinking about, again, our core team and our ad hoc members, and we want the team to be considering, can we do a direct intervention? Can we do something directly with Michael, or do we need to do indirect? I'll talk about that in a few minutes. What kind of settings is Michael in, and how do we increase or decrease risk? Where might risk be in these settings? Where does he appear to be most concerning? What are some of the key relationships in Michael's life that we can leverage to help support him and maybe to reduce risk? And what's our priority for interventions, and who's responsible for carrying those out? So your secondary prevention teams are going to be considering, you have to consider who's in charge of the team, some of the legal considerations. I won't get into those in detail, but you obviously need to consider legal considerations and information sharing, ethical information sharing as well, not just the legal information sharing, moving from just assessing what's wrong to actually developing and implementing a plan that addresses the problematic behavior, and ensuring that the team works well together. So I'm looking forward to hearing about my Toronto colleagues, because I have had the privilege of already hearing some about their program, and I know you've had experiences developing these teams and doing that hard work of working in a multidisciplinary team. In general, though, we're thinking about secondary prevention elements, including an education component, identification, engagement, care, and transition. And so briefly, I'm going to define those. So as we see, education is, how do we educate the members of our community who are in a good place to recognize risk when it's in front of them? Who is important to know what risk looks like and where to go to get help? In this case, we've got employers that might need some education about what risk looks like. We might have family members. In your communities, you might have religious groups or religious institutions and communities who might need some education about, these are some of the red flags that we're listening for. Here's who you call for help if you see this, or for us to help you, or for us to work maybe one-on-one with an individual who might be at risk. And we want to think about who already exists in your community that can do this kind of education. So thinking about who, again, might be doing public health information or public health education, who might already have some training or skills in outreach and education. So we want to build awareness in your communities about what we're looking for in risk, because we want those people to identify the Michaels in our community and then know where to go. Where do they reach out? So the next step then is, we've educated our community. Now our community identifies, this is someone I'm concerned about. Who do I call? And we've got to have someone for them to call when they've, is there a hotline? Do you have an intake line? Who is going to make that initial assessment of whether this is someone who is in scope for your secondary prevention program or not, and where would they be referred to otherwise? The next step, of course, in the secondary prevention is engagement. And I think of engagement as how do we get people's buy-in or motivation to engage in whatever treatment or management plan we're putting together. So we need to be able to engage. Who's going to engage Michael? Who's going to reach out to Michael and talk to him? Who's the best person to say, Michael, there's something wrong here. We need to address this behavior, or you cannot behave like this. And how are we going to approach this? But we also need to engage the other members of our team that might be doing the management or the treatment. We're going to need to engage providers. We're going to need to engage community organizations. We're probably going to need to engage his ex-wife, maybe the employer, maybe his friends and coworkers as a support system. How do we get everybody working together on the same page to support the needs we have of de-escalating Michael, reducing that risk with him? I want to take a moment to say, like, engaging everybody is the critical step, and we highlight that because it can be a very, very challenging step to getting care into place. And we divide care into 3 different areas. I'm sorry, I forgot I needed to change my slide. Care is actually the assessment piece of it. It's ideally this comprehensive process of understanding the credibility and the seriousness of a potential threat. And then what kinds of strategies we might use to mitigate that threat. So the assessment is both, in my world, in my language, we're trying to understand what's going, we're assessing it, and then we're building a treatment plan or we're building a management plan. What are we going to do? Then one of the challenges in secondary prevention is to move into that actual implementation of that care. It's not enough to say, yeah, there's a problem here, we should do something about it. We then have to do the thing. So our management components are the environmental strategies that we might use, or the changes to the environment that we might make to reduce risk. Some of the management strategies that are commonly used in secondary prevention might be temporarily reducing or restricting access to weapons. It could be increasing supervision on the individual. This could be anything from check-ins with a provider or a community organization, or even just check-ins with a respected peer or a mentor, someone who's just like, hey, how's it going? Everything going okay, Michael? You still going to work every day? Did you get groceries this week? How's your functioning in those general ways? And it could be all the way down to something, depending on the context this person is in and the legal allowances for this. It could be even monitoring their online behavior. So supervising what they're doing to make sure we're not escalating in some way based on that online behavior. Management looks very different in different settings. Management, obviously, in a school setting looks very different and can be implemented differently if you're talking about an adolescent who might be at risk for harming people versus an adult in a community setting. Management in a workplace to reduce threat or risk in a workplace looks very different, again, than like management in the community. So management is the ways, again, that we can modify the environment to reduce risk. This is again, it's not addressing the core issues, but it's putting safeguards potentially around them to reduce the potential that someone can act on concerning behavior. In addition to management, ideally, we are able to implement some kind of treatment. And treatment is the services that we can implement that actually address the drivers of the risk, what's underneath or motivating this risk. And we can take wild guesses in Michael's case about what's driving the risk. It might be that treatment, part of what's driving his risk is the substance use. It's reducing his inhibitions. It's maybe reducing his healthy coping mechanisms. He's using it as an unhealthy coping mechanism. It's escalating risk. We might need to provide some kind of alcohol and drug treatment in order to reduce that risk, but we need to address that. It might be maladaptive ways of understanding relationships. It might be emotion regulation and behavioral regulation issues. Whatever is underneath that and driving the risk is what we need to provide some kind of treatment for. And it can be all kinds of, I don't just mean like a mental health treatment. Treatment can be anything that's actually getting at the risk. I have worked with individuals who were very heavily involved in violent extremist groups. And part of what was driving their involvement was that they were unable to obtain employment in any other way. And the only way they had financial security was to be involved in violent criminal gangs. And so what was driving the risk was actually just the practical need of they couldn't meet their basic needs, or the perception was he couldn't meet his basic needs unless he was involved in a criminal gang. So part of addressing the driver of that was getting some workforce development training for him, and some training so that he could get a job in a pro-social way. And that had this trickle-down effect on everything else around him, all of his relationships and all of his behaviors. And I do just want to take a moment to talk about, I think sometimes when we're thinking about intervention or care, we're always thinking about direct intervention. Sometimes we're also, it's okay to be thinking about indirect intervention. So the things that we might do with the relationships or the systems around somebody that could reduce risk. So in short, these are the elements of a secondary prevention program that we want to have in place, and and your communities can develop, and we can talk about each of these in far more depth. But I want to sit back and give my Canadian colleagues a chance to tell you about their program.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And we'll turn it over to Toronto, and because I know they have a lot to share. But thank you, Sarah, for that great introduction and foundation. So over to you, Toronto.
Thanks, folks. I guess good morning, good afternoon. I'm not sure where you are, but good day, I guess. We're happy to be here. My name's Matthew Carroll. I'm the supervisor of Focus and Spider at the City of Toronto. I'm joined with my colleagues that are supporting and are subject matter experts in this work, Brian Smith of Toronto Police Service, and also Yvonne Smith of United Way Greater Toronto. So thanks so much for having us in space today. We have about 10 minutes, so we'll be succinct, and I'll be turning to my colleagues if they need to add any additional context so that we can answer questions a little bit better also at the end. So furthering our community by uniting services, FOCUS is the acronym, in Toronto is at the intersection of secondary prevention. So obviously, as discussed, measures aimed at people in the early stages of risk development and tertiary prevention. And so these are also those measures aimed at people for whom the problem has already occurred. And so Focus Toronto is co-led by the City of Toronto itself, United Way of Toronto, and Toronto Police Service. And Focus Toronto is an innovative community safety and well-being initiative that aims to reduce crime, victimization, and improve community resilience and well-being in a variety of contexts. Focus Toronto is also one of several other programs under SafeTO at the City of Toronto. And so SafeTO is our comprehensive 10-year plan to advance community safety and well-being. This is also enabled by legislation in Ontario, the Community Safety and Policing Act, which requires municipalities to have a community safety and well-being plan, which Toronto obviously has as well. And so SafeTO provides a roadmap for how the city and social systems that serve Torontonians, such as community services, businesses, healthcare, education, the justice system in itself, can work collaboratively across sectors and with all levels of government to support community safety and well-being. And so the cross-sectoral collaboration approach of SafeTO is well reflected in Focus Toronto. So Focus is obviously an outcome of SafeTO, where in our program, there's 180 city and community partners who meet weekly to identify individuals, groups, and places that are experiencing high risk. And this could include antisocial or criminal behavior, where either they're the victims or also the perpetrators, or experiencing violence, for example, human trafficking, trauma, and other issues with their social determinants of health and health inequities, which allows us to mobilize resources for interventions with those 180 plus partners. Some fast facts just about Focus and situation tables. Focus actually began in 2013 in Rexdale, which is one of our communities in Toronto. And there was great learning from practices in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, which actually started the first table in Canada. Today, there are over more than 60 situation tables across Ontario, the province that Toronto is in. And Focus Toronto model brings together the most appropriate community agencies at a weekly situation table. So in Toronto, we have 7 situation tables. They cover the entirety of the span of Toronto, and it's a geographic-based response based on those tables. Focus Toronto provides a direct wraparound approach to the most vulnerable individuals, families, and places that are experiencing heightened levels of risk in those specific geographic locations, such as the table that falls within that catchment. Focus works with a variety of clinical, community, health, and social services. So for example, it could be hospitals, community-based organizations, mental health organizations, in that wraparound to mitigate and reduce risk. So what we thought we would do is just give potentially a case kind of a reflection or scenario. We kept it a little bit broad, and Brian has also been leading some of this work as well. So Brian can add context in the end of this, but one of just example that kind of spans a couple different areas, just so you get an appreciation of how the situation table may support. And so this is actually interrupting the cycle of trauma in Scarborough, which is a neighborhood in Toronto. And so the representative of Scarborough Centre for Healthy Communities, which is an organization at our table, received a referral for a young woman who was seeking mental health support. The client had a very traumatic past. Her mother died when she was young, and she experienced abuse from her father. The client was also previously involved in human trafficking. The client reported feeling depressed and also suicidal ideations, and she was requesting mental health support. The client also had an unstable housing situation and was in need of dire housing supports. The mental health caseworker assigned to this client provided 1 year of case management support. The client was connected to a primary care provider, a registered social worker for counseling, and the Housing Help Center, another partner at Focus Toronto, provided housing support. In addition to that, Toronto Employment and Social Services, this is our city division, which provides financial assistance to folks, was attached to the situation as well. Focus was integral in convening these agencies to come together to plan an intervention that was responsive and appropriate for this client. The agencies continued to collaborate and communicate throughout this client's time while she was receiving care, meeting for case conferences, discussing resources for the client, and providing supports for just basic necessities, including food and other supports. Once the connections were made, the client's life slowly began to show small progress, finally receiving also a mental health diagnosis, a borderline personality disorder. She started engaging in a treatment plan, which included medication and dialectical behavior therapy. And furthermore, she began to get involved in fitness training and secured stable housing. The client also became more self-confident in this process, and the caseworker that was attached continued to provide support to this client through regular check-ins and crisis management and case management appointments. The client eventually obtained employment and moved out of Scarborough, and after a post-treatment check-in over the phone, the client stated that she was doing well and extended her gratitude to all of us that were part of her care. So, this is a broad example, and I'll turn it over to Brian that can provide some context, in this work as well, just because he's a subject matter expert as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Matthew, and hello, everyone. So I work for the Toronto Police, and I've been involved with Focus since 2016. And beginning in around that time or a year earlier, we realized there was a gap for extremism. Basically, was no agencies in Toronto, let alone Canada, that would really engage with clients with behaviors of targeted violence or ideologically motivated violent extremism. So we leveraged some of our focus partners, and one focus partner, Yorktown Family Services. I have the link there, the ETA program. They jumped in with both feet. They were a youth-focused and mental health agency, and they've built up their capacities that they are now one of the top agencies in Canada, and they're even being leveraged in the United States by Homeland Security in New York State to do training down there. So we're in a pretty good place when it comes to tertiary prevention. And Focus is, kind of on the cusp of tertiary and secondary, but we are also able to leverage Focus very much for basic secondary prevention. If you think about referrals that come from police, let's say it's some sort of a 911 call. Let's say we're there for the mother, but I mean, the officers, asking questions, looking around, they realize the entire family is in various need. That entire family gets referred to Focus. And our family referrals happen as a matter of routine, not just from the police, but all of our partners. So, often you think about police response to a 911 call, often not for the reasons that why you're there in the first place, to leverage the referral. So, yeah, I don't know. I know we're short on time, so I could probably go on like this for a while. I'll put my email in the chat if anyone ever wants to reach out. Let's see if Yvonne has anything you want to add.
No, I think you both covered it all. And given we don't have a lot of time, I'll just leave the time for questions and chime in there.
Thank you both, and thank you to Toronto and to Sara. And I imagine there'll be some questions for for both. So please, the floor is open. Otherwise, I will ask. Well, I guess my question, I'll start us off. I guess my question is, as you're dealing with some of the more ideologically motivated issues and threats and concerns that are increasingly on people's mind, how has your program been able to sort of adjust to that perhaps more sensitive and more acute environment in Toronto?
Well, we recognized, I mean, in early days, 100% of all referrals involving, CVE or preventing extremism came from police. And we recognize that, police can't be everywhere and police do not know everything. So there's obviously a lot of people out there that need help and support. So we were very focused on building a model that had multiple pathways into the model. So yeah, it could be a police referral. ETA Ontario now advertises. People can reach out directly to them. They have a 24-hour chat. Focus agency partners may see something within their client base. They can bring that referral to the table. We'll make sure that the ETA programs is attached. But I guess to deal with that delicate piece, a lot of it is in the clinical piece, the ETA program piece, and it's the work that they're doing to really show youth and young adults different pathways, certainly away from the one that they're on.
And I guess another question I would have, while I'm sure people are all coming up with their own questions, I hope, is this is for United Way. I mean, it's a pretty unique collaboration here. I mean, we've worked with a lot of organizations, a lot of cities around the world, and we rarely see this kind of public-private collaboration at a city level on this kind of violence, essentially violence intervention or disruption program. And so what allows United Way to sort of be so in on this? Like, what, in the partnership with the police, the partnership with the city, what has sort of enabled that to work so well?
I think because United Way, especially in Toronto, has played such a strong role in the system on a whole. Like, I think unlike, because the Toronto United Way is the biggest United Way of all the United Ways. And because we already have a presence with funding so many different agencies, as well as having relationships with government and releasing community changing reports and so forth, it just made sense for us to be involved and invest in the Focus Toronto model. It just aligns with our work. We benefit from it because we have the data. We fund over 100 agencies that and many of which are involved in Focus Toronto. So it just made sense with regard to our theory of change and the work we're already doing to be involved in this work.
Interesting. And then I guess sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
I wonder, might be a follow-on question to that, Yvonne, that how a lot of the folks that I'm assuming are in attendance are thinking about how they might put something together like this incredible program that you have in Toronto, the Focus program. And you said you've got 190 organizations that have come together. If they're thinking, how do I get all of my community to come together the way you have been able to? What are some lessons learned that you have of getting all of those stakeholders to the table together?
I think that every context is different. So in Toronto, I think it was key to have United Way involved because in some cases, people are upset with the police, people are upset with the city, so like United Way has that sort of like neutral position to say like, hey, come on over. You know what I mean? Give these guys a chance. Let's hear them out. And I think we helped open that door so that community could see like, you know what? police ain't that bad. The city ain't that bad. Not that they're bad at all, but like it provides an opportunity to develop a relationship with the community. It was a rough go at first in Rexdale for our first situation table, but over time, community just learned that the officers at the table were there to help. That the city of Toronto was there to help, and now. Before we expand into other communities, our reputation precedes us. They were asking for it, but it took time, and I think it took United Way, being that neutral partner, to be able to help open that door. And I think in addition to that, us being very intentional about doing that stakeholder engagement, surveying community, consulting them, and including them in the process so that there's buy-in. What was important as well. So it was a slow process, but that's what it took.
So when you say, I see in Brian's share that this is an unfunded model.
Yes.
And so I think that's really important. So obviously there's some funding that goes into working, but you're saying that focus itself is not, there's no budget line for focus per se. It's the Toronto Police is contributing, United Way is contributing,
Yes.
and the City of Toronto is contributing through their existing resources. Is that?
Yeah. I mean, so I know, and all three partners have like dedicated full-time staff to it. But I think to be clearer, we don't fund the agencies to attend the situation tables on a weekly basis. And I think there are some models, I think in for example, New York region, they actually make some funding available for the participants to apply for, the stakeholder like agencies to apply for, to address any issues that come up, or systemic barriers or stuff like that come up through the model. So any emerging issues, I should say.
And then I think another question that I assume is on not just my mind is, in a lot of cities, particularly in North America, when you're talking about these issues that Focus is involved in, October 7th, 2023, and what happened after had a huge impact on cohesion in cities. And I'm wondering how that impacted Focus, and whether you've seen sort of, whether it's in the ability to gain trust from different parts of the city, that communities that had been actively engaged in the program, or new issues that came up at these tables. I'm just wondering if there's any connections there.
Sure, I can help respond to that. I think, in Toronto and across Ontario, having those community safety wellbeing plans are critical as part of our legislative mandate to function as a municipality in terms of serving Torontonians and respective municipalities. And I think that at the City of Toronto, we recognize that Focus is a tool. It's not the only tool. It's a part, of a whole tool belt of different programs, services, and initiatives that we offer. One of the really important initiatives that has launched in the last couple of years in Toronto is the Toronto Community Crisis Service, which is a alternative crisis model that responds to calls from 911 and 211 for people experiencing mental health and addictions crisis. It's a culturally informed program where we have Indigenous staff. They use Afrocentric approaches and different kind of methodologies in responding to the needs of those communities. And this was, funded from the City of Toronto, that's working with 4 anchor partners in community to provide those services in community to respond to folks that are experiencing a whole myriad of issues. They're actually a partner with us as well at Focus. And so I think, in terms of our work at the municipality, with SafeTO, having these programs in our tool belt, we're able to work together to build trust with community in different ways, so that we can leverage each other's experiences, but also resources in such a way that we're able to connect with, communities that are equity deserving communities and are challenged in accessing supports. So I think that helps, at least in our context, but if anyone else wants to add, feel free.
Yeah, I would just add that, this would be anecdotal, but, seeing more youth, more so as direct referrals right to the ETOA program. And I know they've been quite busy. So more youth that may be coming to the attention of police or school from what's happening at school or from what's happening online. We've seen an increase of that. And then maybe even an increase with more disorganized ideologies, right? It's nothing clear cut. You know, it's not like 2015, 2016 where it was ISIS inspired, right? It's now you got misogyny, you got Nazism, you know, you got anti-Semitism, you got a whole bunch of different things all mixed together.
Thank you. And maybe Sara, a question for you is the same question, you know, in the work that you do, obviously it's not geographically specific. Have you seen a change since October 7th? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll take I'll approach it in two different ways. So in my clinical work is very geographically specific. I only practice in Oregon. I would agree. I wouldn't see a significant difference in my one-to-one therapy with violent extremists. But what I do hear are the ways that the impacts of October 7th are affecting the extremist communities. And as we're trying to extract people from those communities, the way that new narratives are coming up, or the same narratives are being recycled, but now there are ways that the news is leveraging, and the news is being leveraged to support basically extremist narratives. It's been very challenging in that way. Also geographically, I'm part of, in my work at Moonshot, is working to stand up the secondary prevention infrastructure in the state of New York. So like on the totally the other side of the country, working with the behavioral threat assessment and management teams, identifying their training needs and so on. So, and the significant infrastructure that they're creating in the state of New York. And I would say from those teams, those multidisciplinary teams, we are hearing things related, of course, to October 7th. But as Brian said, it's that disorganized ideology. Sometimes it's called salad bar. Sometimes it's just kind of, it feels like a free-for-all. There's just such availability of extremist narratives, and violence justifying, dehumanizing narratives are so readily available right now. It's just so easy to come by them because of our connectivity right now and in this time in history.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to comment on anything or ask a question? We have 2 minutes left. And I want to be very respectful of everyone's time. If not, to our Toronto colleague, Sara, is there anything else you want to add before we sign
Sorry,
off?
there's one that just popped up in the chat.
Okay, please. I was wondering about social media red flags.
I'm gonna guess, with our short amount of time, the red flags meaning what somebody might be posting on social media. I mean, I think in terms of, I would welcome Brian's input on this. As two things that I'm looking for are we justifying violence? Doesn't imply that somebody is at risk for committing violence or is planning to commit violence. But if you are sharing, talking about violence justifying, dehumanizing content, I get concerned. I think that's where secondary prevention comes in. Why are we thinking that violence is an acceptable way to treat members of our community based on their identities?
Yeah, just to add what Sara said. Yeah, sometimes certainly things escalate, you know, and then, you know, police are involved in investigating to see what it is. And, you know, a lot of times we've had these, you know, end up being a youth. But then also Moonshot in Canada is involved in that space where they are monitoring social media. And if they do, you know, if there is a person that maybe you know, is espousing different ideologies, they can then show them a pathway to reaching out and talking to somebody. And that could be ETA in Toronto, that could be Shift out in British Columbia, or it could be, you know, one of the collaborations we have in Quebec. So yeah, and they are getting some referrals from that. So that's kind of what's happening up here.
Great, thank you so much. It's 2 o'clock in the East Coast, so we'll call it a day. Again, this is the fourth of a 4-part series, but we are going to be, by popular demand, extending the series. More to follow, but we think a monthly webinar on issues of prevention at the city level in this time that we're all facing, I think is important, and we will continue to do our what we can to support more city engagement on these issues. So stay tuned for more information. Thank you to Sara. Thank you to Team Toronto.